difficult things in our lives is figuring out what season we're in and how to handle it.
We can either just respond or react to a season, but we can also lead through a season and even create new seasons as God gives us opportunity.
To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under the heaven. It's Ecclesiastes 3, verse 1. Young Christian man, welcome back to Seeking Wisdom, Season 2, Episode 2. We are here with Dad again today, and it's been a while since we've had him on the podcast, so just a quick refresher. That's my dad. He is the pastor at Open Door Baptist Church in Denham Springs, Louisiana, and just a great man, a man that I want to be like whenever I grow up. And we had him on our very first episode. We asked him, what is wisdom? We're going to have him back again today. And what I want to ask you about, Dad, is I want to talk to you about the seasons in a man's life, right? Because Ecclesiastes points out that there are seasons for things. I think it says, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant, a time to harvest. In our lives, we can tell that there are seasons. There's a season that you need to be a student, a season that you need to be a dad, a season that you need to be a husband or be looking for a bride. There's a season where you need to be preparing to go back home to heaven, right? There's a season to everything on earth, and one of the difficult things in our lives is figuring out what season we're in and how to handle it. So, Dad, welcome to the show.
Well, I'm glad to be here. I am thankful that you invited me to be back. I guess apparently the very first time I was on with you didn't scare too many people away, so that's a good thing. So I appreciate the opportunity to be back with you again today and to be able to discuss the subject because I think it's a very important subject when it comes to our lives. I think truly it's something that we sometimes don't even think about because if we just look at what's going on in the world, it's easy to just be very reactionary about what goes on rather than being intentional or understanding about what's going on. But even as you talked about just a moment ago, when it comes to those seasons, you're talking to young men, and that's a season of life because here I am, and I'm not a young man anymore. And I have to admit that, but I'm in a different season. But we all have different seasons and trying to look at that. So it's an exciting, very important topic to be able to look at.
Absolutely. All right, so first, just to jump in, what are seasons in a man's life? And like when we're taking for granted that people understand what we're talking about, but how do what is that? What is it?
Well, I think there's a lot of different ideas to be able to honestly look at it because when it comes to a season, just like we talked about, we're talking to specifically young men. So when it comes to your podcast, the intention for young men to be able to listen to it, to be able to learn. But then there's also the thought that they're going to continue to grow up. The idea is that they will continue to mature, then eventually become middle-aged men and older men and so on and so forth until we go to heaven. And when it comes to those seasons, those are some natural seasons, but then there's some other seasons that come up in life too, because there are some things, we could look at examples in the Bible of people who went through different seasons in life, and we see those naturally occurring, but then there's some opportunities that are in those seasons too, because we can, as I mentioned before, we can either just respond or react to a season, but we can also lead through a season and even create new seasons as God gives us opportunity. So there's a lot of overlapping seasons, I would say.
So are seasons connected to growth?
They could be, because seasons can also be periods where we decline as well, and we have to be careful about that. Sometimes you think of the example of Moses. He's one of the examples I would pull out, and Moses was a man who he had a lot of great promise, and here he was promised pretty much the kingdom of Egypt, and then what we find is that he tried to take things into his own hands, and he was trying to create a new season, but it didn't go very, very well. And then he found himself on the backside of the desert. So that was like a desert season, if you will, a time of growing. And here he was, a middle-aged man. He was, 40 before God called him again to go back into Egypt and to go tell Pharaoh, go let my people go, right? And so we think about that time. It was a long period of time. And so there are going to be different spans of time. And sometimes there'll be a period of growth. I think Moses learned a lot of things. He learned how to be humble because he was very, very full of pride early on. And then God helped him to work on that. He ended up being a shepherd for a long time. And then God used him after that. So it could be a period of growth, and it could also be a period of decline as well.
What do you think makes the difference?
I would say it comes back to the heart. A lot of it comes back to the perspective. And I don't know, one of the old adages, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. I don't know. It's kind of an interesting saying or expression. It's not a Bible verse, certainly. But as we look at life and trying to determine how we're going to respond to those seasons really determines how we will grow or not. I guess an example of that would be Joseph in the book of Genesis, and how Joseph, he had so many ups and downs in the storyline of his life. And as you look at his periods of growth and things, he's really seemed to thrive and prosper through every stage of life. And if I could say that would be my prayer, is that even as I continue and as young men continue to listen to your podcast, is that they would glean and learn and listen like Joseph did, because the Bible doesn't say that there's really anything negative about Joseph in the Old Testament. Certainly he was not a perfect man, but if we could do anything, that we would learn and strive to be consistent in our life to be able to grow and to be able to use those times of life in a successful way.
Yeah. So then I guess our next question, and this is, in my mind, this is the hardest question, but how do we distinguish these seasons? Because I think, okay, so for instance, right now, I am what I would describe as being on the on-ramp into adulthood. Like, I'm about to get on the interstate, and I'm getting close, I'm in the merge lane right now. I'm getting ready to merge onto the interstate, about to be like a full-on independent adult. How would someone like me or someone in any other stage of their life, how would they distinguish what season they are supposed to be in at this point?
Well, it's a little complicated. There's not a simple answer to that. I would say, as an example, you're talking to young men, perhaps who are younger than you. Maybe they're teenagers who are taking some steps forward, and they're going through certain normal, natural stages. Example, they want to get their driver's license, and they're discerning these types of things coming up. And then for you, as an example, you've got your driver's license, you're going through college right now, and you're discerning where you are right now, but you're also looking forward to what future stages of time that God's going to give you as well. And when it comes to discerning that, really, it's kind of a complicated answer, because one, you have to look at what your age is. There's some normal, natural things that happen in society and in our time. But then there's also Bible examples, because, example, we think of David, who was a shepherd boy, and all of a sudden, he's not just a shepherd boy, but Samuel comes and anoints him to be king. He goes out and he fights against Goliath. I mean, all of a sudden, there's a lot of things that start happening in his life, and he's trying to discern, wow, I've got all these opportunities, all these challenges as well, because, man, there's all kinds of things that could come up. We can see later on in his life, at an later stage of his life, where he chose some bad, negative things in his life too. And so trying to discern where we are, I think, honestly, that consistency comes back to really being thankful where we are. And then also thanking God for where we are in life, because we have a tendency to be not thankful for where we are. And it's like, example, you go back in life and you're like, well, I don't have a driver's license yet. I can't wait to get my driver's license. And then we're like, I can't wait to graduate from high school. I can't wait to get my first car, or to finally date, or something. And we have all these ideas that in the future, there's something coming up that is going to be so much better and greater than what I have now. And you know what it's like. You get your driver's license, and now, hey, Dan, do you mind going picking up a gallon of milk? So there's other responsibilities. It's like, that's not what I planned. I thought I was going to have adventures with a car, right? And we have to learn to be thankful where we are. I think that's one of the aspects. And then be consistent in trying to take steps forward where we are. And the way that we do that is, I think a great verse to think about is Romans 8:28. We know all things work together for good to those who love God. And we know that everything in God's plan is for a time. It is for a season. And when we accept that in our lives, then God does something special and wonderful as we recognize it and see, because, as I mentioned, I think it's really difficult to sometimes know exactly, if you will, seasons apart from age. I'm thankful to be able to have an age, right? Everybody that's listening now, it's getting a little bit older. The numbers start adding up much faster now. But yeah, I do think that when it comes to looking at life, we have to discern where we are and look around at our surroundings and understand that this is a season, this is where we are, and God's doing something special.
So I like the way you describe that. So our season, like distinguishing seasons, is a lot more observation and contentment than it is planning. Am I getting that right?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess for us, like, we should be a lot more looking at where God has us and asking what are the responsibilities in that place, what are the opportunities in that place, rather than thinking, where do I need to go? What's the what do I need to change about this? It's a lot more, God, what have you given me already?
Oh, yeah. I think there's an acceptance of where we are. We look at a young man who's in high school. Maybe they're listening to this right now, and they're like, oh, man, I can't wait until I get out of school so that I can go into business or whatever. And the fact is that where they are right now is to be in school.
Mm-hmm.
That's God's calling on their life. They should be dedicated to getting their schoolwork done and to prosper through that period of time until they graduate. And I think graduation or commencement is such a great picture of a transition that we continue to have in life. And hopefully we'll continue to have even more commencements throughout life, whether they're formalized or not. Maybe it's a college degree or something else. But when it comes to life, we do have that commencement. We do continue to grow. And eventually we take that step heavenward when God calls us home, and there's a commencement that happens there as well. But it is, like you mentioned, it is that recognition of where we are, seeing what God has for us right now where we are, and then even taking steps to lead through that into the future too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, whenever I was still in high school, I would hear people talk all the time and say, you're like, God has you in school. That's where he wants you. It's God's will for you to be in school right now. And I would, every time I heard that, I bucked against it in my mind. I was like, you don't know God's will for me. Like, that's not your choice.
Right.
What if God's will isn't for me to be in school? But the reality is, if he put me in school, if he allowed me to be there, then it was his will for me to be in school,
mm-hmm.
or else I wouldn't have been in school. And I think that goes for no matter where you are. If you are there, unless you're there because you made a choice against God's will, but if you are there, then it's God's will for you to be there, or else he wouldn't have allowed it to happen.
Right.
Okay, so then the next question is, we figured out what season we're in, but then things happen in life. They rock our boat, right? How do we stay stable in those seasons? And is our stability connected to those seasons somehow? Could you dive into that with us?
Okay, ask that question again.
How do we stay stable?
How do we stay stable?
The season we're in.
Yeah, I think that recognizing God's work in our life is the stabilizing factor. Otherwise, we just pack up and run, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's so many things that happen that cause us to be blindsided, things that we don't plan for. And if there's anything in life and ministry and being married and having kids teaches you, is that you cannot prepare for everything. I was a Boy Scout as a kid, and the motto was be prepared. But as much as I may try to make sure I've got my pocket knife or something, it doesn't take care of everything. The multi-tool in my pocket doesn't take care of all the situations. So I need to trust God. And that's really the stabilizing force that he gives to us. I allude back to those passages I mentioned, Romans 8:28. We know all things work together for good. And we do realize that. And as soon as we don't recognize that, that's when we're going to fall off the horse. That's when we're going to falter, or we're going to try to come up with our own alternative plan. We think about Abraham in the Old Testament, and he was going through seasons in his life. And rather than trusting God, he tried to take things into his own hands, to do things his own way. And now, even today, thousands of years later, we see the repercussions of his decisions. And we've got to find that stability in Christ and to realize his goodness and to trust him through that, because he's the master planner. He knows what's going on each and every day. And even as we read those verses, as you started out in Ecclesiastes 3, and it reminds us that God prepares all these different seasons. And we can look up and we can see the moon, and we can see the stars, and we can see different stars at different seasons. And God did that to help us to know that things change, but there's also some consistency, and we can continue to trust him because of the design that he has made.
Yeah. I love, this is like total rabbit trail for a second. I love the way God designed seasons. Like, not the seasons we're talking about, but like literal, the 4 seasons of the year. Because it's constantly changing, but it's constantly repetitive as well. So like, you always have something new to look forward to, but you always have something comforting to go back to because you know it's going to be the same every time.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's just, I love that
Yeah.
about God. I think I learned that from C.S. Lewis.
Yeah, I don't
he
think it's
talked
that
about.
far off, though, either, because even as we're talking about the opportunities we have, we see that in life we go through those different seasons, sometimes where it's winter, spring, summer, fall. And think about a farmer. I mean, that's his life. He lives through those seasons.
Mm-hmm.
And some seasons are more fun than others. Some seasons are busier than others. Some you're just trusting God even more. And we need to learn that. I think there's a principle in Galatians 6 where it reminds us that be not deceived, God is not mocked. Whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. And that verse really deals with the seasons of life. And so we think about going through seasons. And when it comes to consistency, imagine the farmer. If he wasn't consistent, I mean, he's going through winter. What is he doing? He's preparing his seed. He's thinking about what's going to be happening in the spring, and he's preparing. Then in springtime, he's preparing the field, and he realizes, hey, this is my calling in life. This is my lot in life. This is what I need to do, because if I don't do this now, there's the go to the ant thou sluggard, right? And he realizes that I need to make sure that I'm doing this because winter's going to be coming again. And then he goes through all of those different seasons, and he's faithful to recognize the season he's in. And so that's where I think you bring up a great point about when it comes to being just simply consistent, recognizing the season and doing what God's called you to do through those times faithfully and trusting God.
So faithfulness despite the season.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And knowing you may not know everything that's going on, because even in the season, it's supposed to be colder, right? Well, how cold is it going to actually get? We think about the winter that we had here in Louisiana in January. We were building an igloo in our front
Awesome.
yard. It was kind of strange, but it's you don't know exactly what the weather's going to be like. I mean, you can pull out the Farmer's Almanac and guess as much as you want to, but we have to be consistent and follow God.
Yeah. Okay, so then if we change our direction, we've talked about figuring out, it's a lot more about observing the season God has you in and being content where he's put you. But we also know that sometimes the season does have to change. Sometimes you need to move on. Whenever we get to a place like that, how do we know when a season either is changing or needs to change? And then when it is changing, how do we adjust accordingly? How do we discern what needs to change in our actions?
Mm-hmm.
And we can split those up if you want, and I'll repeat it for you. The first part is, how do we know when a season is changing or needs to change?
Well, it's going to depend on what those seasons are, because as I mentioned, usually we're in multiple seasons, if I can say it that way. The farmer, he deals with 4 different seasons, and that's a normal cycle that we go through. But as an example, I have different hats that I wear. So I might be in a season at church, the church that I'm leading, a different season as a dad, and I'm also a grandfather now. So there's different seasons that I have there. So there's all kinds of overlapping seasons that we have. But when it comes to discerning and we realize that a season is changing, we have to try to notice it, because we don't always quite get it. Sometimes seasons subtly change, and then we look back and say, oh, this is a different season. So I think we'd be careful about that and watch for those things. But then also try to lead through those seasons too, because we might go through something that is positive or negative, and that consistency we have with our faith in the Lord will help us with that. But trying to discern and watching what's going on, because there's relationships that are at play, and we want to try to lead people. And that's one of the things when it comes to leading these young men who are listening right now. How can we lead through those seasons? Because maybe they're on a basketball team or a sports team and they're having a winning season, or maybe they're having a losing season. Can they practice a little bit harder? Can they have a better spirit about things? Can they do something a little bit differently? Can they go home and work on some things? Can they do some extra push-ups? Whatever the case is. And there are certain things that we can do to change things. There are other parts of seasons that we can't change. And that's where we have to recognize God's hand in that and trust him for those things. So what we can change, let's change and try to be positive about that, because we can also be a negative detriment to ourselves and our relationship with God, our relationship with other people, or we can take a positive spin to those things and to do what's right. Meanwhile, the things that we can't change, we can either have a good attitude about it or we can have a bad attitude about those things.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. And then I guess my question to follow up is, what about the things that we can change, but maybe we shouldn't change yet? Are there ever times like that?
Oh, yeah, because I think we're always trying to push, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
We're like, hey, I really want this. And then usually, oftentimes it comes down to our wants. And James says that. He says you have not, because we ask amiss, and we're trying to consume things upon our own lust. We have to wait for God. And if we had everything we wanted, that probably be a very dangerous thing. But I'm thankful that God blesses us. He does give us wisdom over time. Of course, James says that as well. If we lack wisdom, let him ask of God. And God gives us wisdom. He blesses us with that. And we need to pray that God would give us wisdom to help us to recognize those times and what we should be doing. And that's really the question, Lord, what do you want from me? How should I respond? We think about taking steps forward eventually, like you bought a car.
Yeah.
You saw God's will in buying a vehicle, and that's a changing season. You recognize that, hey, I'm not going to use mom and dad's car anymore. I need my own vehicle to be able to get around. And so you take those steps to pray about it, to trust God for it, and you realize, because there's not a Bible verse says, thou shalt buy a car in the Bible. We have to recognize that there are seasons, there's wisdom we apply to life, and we make those decisions based upon the changing seasons of life.
Gotcha. It reminds me a little bit of David whenever he was in the cave with Saul, right? Like God had already told him he was going to be king. That season was coming, and David knew it. But when David could have killed Saul and could have made the season come right away, David instead said, no, I'm going to wait for God's timing, for God's way to do this. Now, part of that was a clear-cut moral issue. Like, it would have been murder, and not only murder, but treason as well. But at the same time, like, he could have pushed the season. He could have moved on when God hadn't prepared it for him yet. But instead he waited. I think whenever David was about to become king, I don't know if it was the men of Gibeon or something like that, who the Bible says they were able to discern the seasons. And they knew, like, they were able to tell when it was time to stop following Saul and start following David. I might be getting that story a little messed up, but you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it is an important thing. David had great discernment as a young man. I don't know where his discernment sometimes went later on in life, but that's kind of where we are. He was just so wise, and to be the sweet psalmist of Israel, the shepherd of Israel, and then to be the king of Israel. Just amazing to see how God used him and the wisdom that he had. And wouldn't it not be awesome if every one of us guys was like that? And to have that just relationship with God that helps us to discern life and then how to live it well.
All right, last question then. How can you lead others through either a season that you're in with them or through a change in seasons?
Okay, so a season that they're living in, or a change in seasons. Think kind of similar thoughts when it comes to living in a specific time, especially if it's difficult. We think about Nehemiah, and he discerned what was going on at that point. He stepped into that world about Jerusalem, and the walls were not there. They needed to be rebuilt. And so he said, hey, this is where we're at. This is the season. The walls are down. But he didn't say we need to stay here. He said this needs to change. Y'all need walls around this city. And he was so burdened about it that he led through that change. And I think there's an important thing to recognize, that there is an opportunity for young men to lead through change and to be able to influence other people to make good changes in their life too. We all know stories of people who were bad influences in other people's lives. And we have to be so careful to make sure that the way that we live and the things that we do influence people for what's right. Now, as far as changing seasons, sometimes what you mean by that is, hey, this is a season that's changing. It's something I don't have control over. That's where we've got to have the example and the opportunity of, or take the opportunity of making sure that we lead with the right spirit through something, because we don't always like change,
Yeah.
and let's just be honest, the older we get, oftentimes we like change less and less and less. I just wish things were the same, right? And things seem to be changing so much faster now than even when I was a kid. But imagine people who've been around for a long time, they're used to like horse and buggy, and now there's cars and rocket ships, right? But we need to have that good spirit. Joseph, so much happened to him in life, and he learned how to respond through that. And when he was a slave, he had the same spirit as when he was second in charge of all of Egypt. It's pretty amazing.
That's impressive.
It's very impressive. Like, how in the world did this guy not let this go to his head, And
he should have taught David.
I'm guessing David listened from and learned a lot from hearing Joseph's story. But yeah, we look at changing times. Again, if we're looking at it with the perspective of change happening to us, I can't control that I'm getting older. It's just a normal process of life. But there are things that I can do. Try to make sure that I stay healthy, try to exercise or eat the right things, go to bed at the right time. The same things as anybody, because we have to take care of the temple, the body that God has given to us. But we need to discern that and realize that when change happens, we need to respond properly to the change, and we need to follow God's word. If we look at the Bible, it goes through the plane of God, Genesis to Revelation. So we know that God is bringing through seasons. We look at, we believe in the dispensations of Scripture. Those are changes of season that God ordained throughout all of time. We see how individuals had changes in their life. David and Moses, as we brought up, and Joseph, and so many others, they all had seasons. The life of the Apostle Paul, he had seasons. Even Jesus has seasons in his life. And as we look at those things that were happening, we don't just say, no big deal, and kind of go with the flow. In many ways, we have to humble ourselves. God, humbled himself to follow his parents. That's amazing, that God submitted himself to people. And we in life, when it comes to our seasons, we recognize the balance, the commands that are in the Scripture, and we follow God's wisdom to make good decisions through life, whatever's happening.
So humility, obedience, submission, all things we don't like. Do you have any easier advice, please?
No easier advice. The biggest thing is following God's will and surrendering ourselves to that. Because if we surrender to God, God's grace, the Apostle Paul said, is sufficient. And he was in a season of life, part of his life, or maybe his whole life, I don't know. He had whatever it was, a thorn in his flesh, right? Yeah. In his side. And he's like, Lord, take it away. He didn't want that season anymore. And God said, nothing doing. I'm not taking it away.
Suck it up, buttercup.
Yeah, exactly. But with that, he said, I'm going to give you my grace. My grace is sufficient for thee. So for the young men who are listening and they're thinking, I wish I didn't have the thorn in my side of going to school, or maybe having to obey or wake up early in the morning, whatever the thorn in your side might be, let's remember that God's grace is sufficient. He will help us to go through those times. And I'll be honest, there are some thorns in our side, some circumstances and situations or scars or things like that God may never take away this side of heaven. And we may have to wait until we get to heaven to see how God has used that in our life and in the lives of other people.
Amen. Well, I appreciate you talking to us, Dad. I think that was super helpful, insightful. Do you have any closing comments about seasons in our lives?
Seasons in our life, we are all going through them. And so we need to truly have God's wisdom to go through them. And you mentioned Ecclesiastes 3. It was written by the wisest man in the world, and he pointed out that there are seasons. And it would do us well to recognize that there are seasons in life and to take the steps that Solomon and all the wise people of the Scriptures and our Heavenly Father who ordained seasons to reflect upon what the seasons are, to realize where we are in life, and to take steps that are appropriate and glorify Him to be able to successfully wade through those seasons.
Very, very well spoken. I'm going to shut up. Thank you, Dad, for being on the show. Well, guys, that is a wrap for Season 2, Episode 2. I hope that was a blessing to you. I hope you were able to glean something from the wisdom that we just heard. So just remember, there are going to be seasons in your life. Your first priority is not directing your seasons, but letting God direct them, being content in what He's got for you. So be content in those seasons. Rest in the will of God. Follow Him and keep a sweet spirit through it all. And if you do that, you'll be able to not only lead yourself through your seasons of life, but also lead other people through those seasons. All right, practical resource for the week for you. If you go to Art of Manliness, theartofmanliness.com, and look up their man book, it's just a super helpful guide to be able to start a journal kind of thing. And I've done something very similar to it. It's not like a full-on journal where you write an entry every day. It's really just a conglomeration of wisdom. It's really cool. If you look it up, it'll tell you everything you need to know about it. But if you follow that, it'll really help you to be able to look back and see the seasons you've been in and be able to chart, like, this is the season I was in, this is the season I was in at this time, this is where I am now. I have something very similar, and I looked back in it the other day, and it was just like this flood of memories of like, oh, that's what it was going on in my life during that time, and here's how my life is different now, based like different from back then. So if you go to artofmanliness.com and look up the man book, it'll be a super big help to you in distinguishing the seasons in your life. Anyway, that's your practical resource for the week, and I hope this episode was a blessing. As always, guys, act like men, be strong.